episode of Geek Shop. With me again is Chris. Say hi, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Okay, Chris, how old are you?
I don't want to say. I'm approaching 50.
Okay. So, no, we always talk about characters, comics, and all this, but we never talk about how old the characters are.
It's true. Although for Blue Orchid, she's definitely like early teens, I would say.
Okay, that's what I was wondering because we, even when I'm drawing my characters or anyone else's and stuff, I always look at the characters and going, do I make them older, younger, and does it show in the art that they're younger or older?
So how old are the characters in TikTok Tom?
I don't know. I just started thinking about it recently. I was doing something online, and I was thinking I was doing an Icky thing and thinking, I was thinking of the age, and I thought maybe 25.
Okay.
But then again,
is that how old you were when you drew them?
Yes.
So you sort of mirrored, when you invented the characters, they sort of were birthed the age that you were when
around
you
that time,
them.
Yeah, around that age, yeah. But
you probably didn't give it much thought when you created them.
No. Because at that time, you just draw characters, you don't think about the age or anything. Like, the character behind me, only reason you know his age is later on when he got married and he had a kid, then you think, okay, he's older now. But before, you don't know what age he was.
But that brings up the conversation, which is actually the more difficult conversation of aging characters. Do you age your characters? So, like, now that you when you wrote TikTok Tom, you were in your 20s, and so you wrote characters in their 20s. But now, like, can you relate to people in their 20s? Because now you're not in your 20s anymore. You age the characters.
That's another interesting thought you brought, comment you brought up, because do you do that? Because then do you want to show, let's say, for example, TikTok Tom, one of my characters having a midlife crisis,
Exactly. So it's like, it sort of opens you up to new stories, but on the other hand, it kind of limits you to, because then you have to age a character out and sort of, they can't do cool things. Like freezing time is sort of an issue.
But that's what we brought up in our previous episode about doing our environment and scenery and all that stuff, where, you mentioned that, I used references for backgrounds and cityscapes and stuff from when I was in my 20s, but that's what I remember. But again, a 20-year-old from now, that same street corner is different than what I used to remember it as.
Exactly. So it's like, it's funny because, like, if you're looking at like who your audience is, so now your audience would instinctively then be people in their 20s that remember Toronto from then. So it's like, I mean, I guess young people could look at also nostalgia. Like, you can look back on stuff and go, wow, I remember. If you're into 90s stuff. So if you're out there, you're not reading TikTok Tom and you think 90s stuff is cool, it's full of it. So,
but then again, and actually that's an interesting point, because then I could get my kids to look at my work and go, they'll probably think, oh, this looks so old and dated.
I think some kids do. I think you get to a certain age. I think there's definitely a time when everything that you're into is the cool stuff and the old stuff is kind of lame. But then you get to a certain age, and you're like, your 20s and 30s, where all of a sudden you kind of look back on old stuff and go, actually, that old school stuff was kind of cool. Like, I remember looking at like 70s stuff when I was a teenager, and some of it was kind of cool and all that. So it's like, I think everybody goes through phases of that, but it's difficult when you're creating characters to give them an age. I specifically made Blue Orchid younger.
But did you purposely do that, or did you, consciously do that, make her into a teenager, or did you just draw her and just say, you know what, I didn't even think about her age?
I definitely made her a teenager. I thought about it.
Okay, see, when I drew mine, even now when I create new characters, I don't think what age they are. I just draw them.
The main reason I did is just because I think her age is important to the book, because she has a certain naivete and a certain sort of like ignorance to the world. If she was older, it wouldn't work in the story as well.
And you also have her mom and brother in the story also, so that definitely shows her age.
Yeah. So and I didn't want her to like because her father's dead in the story because her father passes away because all the orchids have to. That's how you get the power in the blue orchid world in the family is that one of them has to die. So the past orchid, there's only one
Yes.
orchid, and so you had to know that her father was, she was old enough to sort of accept the responsibility, but not so old that she was, well trained, you
Okay,
know,
interesting. Okay.
and that's sort of part of how I did this story. It's funny because there's another story that sort of follows the idea of like, if you're not good with your powers, what do you do? And this is going to sound silly, but The Greatest American Hero, that TV show,
Yes.
the whole point of that show was about a guy who gets these powers and has no idea how to use them. And it's kind of a fascinating story idea. I mean, obviously I didn't go like the goofy route that he did in that
Yeah,
show.
when he was flying and stuff, it just became. It was an interesting concept, but it just became too goofy.
Yeah, but it's the same concept that I sort of go with, where she doesn't really understand, and to some degrees, her lack of understanding is what makes her better at being the superhero, because she doesn't have a preconceived idea of how to do it. So, like her age as a teenager is the only age that could do that, where she's
Yes,
mature enough
that's
to
it.
be able to deal with it, but she's immature enough that she doesn't think about like adult problems.
Okay, okay. So let me ask you, when you were reading comics earlier, younger age, X Men, whatever, um, did you think about what age those characters were?
I don't think so. As a kid, I definitely didn't, because even Peter Parker was an adult to me.
Peter Parker's an interesting one because they tried showing him as a teenager, they tried showing him as early 20s. Then, I think he's jumped back and forth in his age in the storylines.
Yeah, and he kind of has to, because it's like the whole point of it is him being young. But on the other hand, it's like after a while, it's like how long can you date it? I mean, Archies have done forever,
Yeah,
Betty, but it's like there's been this idea of like there's no sort of way of continuing a story. So if you write like Chris Claremont, you can't have a story advance without the character aging.
that's what remembers me with. I remember the Days of Future Past when there's the old Logan with the gray hair and everything,
Yeah,
and that I think that I've never read it, but there's a series called Old Man Logan. But seeing like Wolverine older and everything, matured and everything, it was interesting. It was an interesting, take on the character.
so does that mean you're going to write an Old Man Tom? Could you like just a story, just one story, like what he's like in 2025?
Oh, that'd be good. That'd be good.
What's happened?
We'll work on something together.
Okay.
No, but
Like,
when you're reading those books and stuff, you never think about, okay. There's some characters that are thrown in, and their age, like Legion of Superheroes. They're teenagers.
yeah,
New Mutants. They were young, kids. You knew
yeah.
that. Power Pack. Like they obviously made those characters, but the mainstream major characters, let's say even like Captain America, Bruce Banner, those guys. You never knew, you never thought about their age.
Yeah, you don't think about it. I mean, I think you just sort of lump them in general places in comic books. Like, you think, okay, well, they're either an adult or a teenager.
And a lot of times, except for someone like Spider-Man or, well, a main character, mainly Superman, they showed him, they showed him at an age, but he also had a job. Where some of the other characters you never seen him at work. Peter Parker was just the guy who was at the Daily Bugle, but that could be any age.
Yeah, like it seemed like he was working part-time.
Yeah, that's it. Where
Yeah.
Superman was, working as a reporter, so you kind of, in your mindset, you're thinking he's, at that time, thinking maybe he's in late 30s, 40s.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting thing you bring up, is the idea that like the age of your character isn't always necessarily on them being the way they're drawn, but sometimes it's about what they do with their lives.
That's it, yes.
So like, and to some degree, that's like Blue Orchid, like her maturity. Obviously, she doesn't have a job, so
No, but,
she's
but with Blue Orchid, because you see the mom and the brother, you kind of directly get what age she is.
yeah, and the fact that she still lives at home.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Where some of the other characters, you know, like mainstream characters, a lot of them you don't see in their daily. You do see them in daily life, but it never clicks in that this person might be this age.
Like, how old do you have to be to graduate Xavier School?
Yeah,
Like, they've
because
been in
you're
school for a long time.
long time, and you do see 12-year-olds to 50-year-olds there.
Exactly. So it's like kind of a weird thing. So that's why it's always confusing, ambiguous, particularly with the X-Men, because they're all in school and they all don't really have real jobs.
I just remember when reading a Kitty Pryde story. When she came into the storyline, she was like what, early teens, wasn't she?
I think so, yeah. But then, yeah, it's weird. That's
And
like,
and rest of them were older, but and I just remember when she came in, I just like, oh, it's a young guy, new young character,
yeah, yeah. But then eventually she's there for like 6 years.
and still the same age. Yeah,
Yeah. It's like The Simpsons.
yeah, true, true. They
Bart
never
would be in
grew.
his 50s by now.
Yeah, they never grew up. But then
Yeah.
again, what we were talking about with Peter Parker was, they had him as a teenager, they had him as a, you know, 25-year-old, then an adult. Then they brought him back to teenager again.
Yeah, that's the beauty of comic books is you don't have to worry about anything. You can always restart your character at whatever age you want.
So let's talk about that character. For example, for you, which stories did you like better? Him as a teenager, like Steve Ditko, one where he's a nerdy kid, or did you like him more as an adult?
So I think that I preferred Peter Parker, the younger Peter Parker, as opposed to the older Peter Parker. And the only reason I preferred that, I think we've discussed this before in the past, where some of my favorite Spider-Man stories are just the stories that are like one and done in the package. You sort of happen from beginning to end. Like one issue and you can just read it and then you're finished. But I find that once you start aging a character, you get more of the soap opera thing because you have more connections in the stories and things
You're
like
right. You're right.
and
Yeah.
that's sort of part of the problem of aging a character is that you can no longer just do those quick stories because now it's like, well, he now has, like, it's not just about trying to get a date with Mary Jane. It's now about, while they're getting married, well, now they plan their marriage. He's going to ask her to marry her. He's got to get a ring. It's like, so it turns into these like long, drawn out stories.
You're right. And did not think about that. Yeah.
So I prefer generally, and even the X-Men is the same. Like when the X-Men are like younger, it's better because it's just like every day is just a new day, as opposed to
That's it. It's like fight the villain of the day, whatever, bam, 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 and next, that's it. Next episode.
exactly.
Where, yeah, you're right. Where Superman married to Lois Lane. It's like, oh, what's going to happen in their life tomorrow?
Exactly, and so it's like there's a sort of continuation, and then there's a need to continue. Like you have to, the next day has to be the next day, not just another day. You know what I mean? It has to be
you're right.
connected
Yes.
to the past. Whereas when you have these like single issue type things, technically you could get like in like the 70s and 60s Superman, you could shuffle them all up and it wouldn't matter.
And also, what you brought up is your point. Let's say you, for example, I'm going to give you as an example, where in your 20s you could just go out and go, hey, I'm going to go to a coffee shop, sit there for an hour or two, sketch away. Now you get up and you go, oh, better ask my wife what we need to do.
Or I got to go to work, or I got this project.
That's at work and all that stuff.
So,
yes.
Yeah, so there's a certain sort of simplicity in that with younger characters that you can do, where you can have sort of this disconnect from life.
Now here's the thing for comics. I know for a while a lot of companies were doing this, like Marvel and DC, but for their mainstream characters, they want to get into the character's personal life and their age and all that stuff. For me as a reader, I really didn't care.
I didn't care either.
Yeah, I just like, what? Just show Peter Parker as a loser, have him fight these people, and that's it.
He's already swinging from webs and climbing up buildings. We don't need reality.
That's it. But they did that for a while, remember? They want to show the personal side of the character.
And it's funny because there's a difference between, you can do that though. Like, I think we've talked about this in the past too, how like Clark Kent and Peter Parker might be more interesting characters than Superman and Spider-Man. So you can show their life, but you just don't have to show like progress in their life.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I think maybe a lot of the times people age characters because they get bored or they have a hard time writing a story that isn't repetitive, and they're afraid that that's a bad thing.
Could be. They're probably thinking, you know what, let's show this guy, like you said, midlife crisis, or, you know, you know, I know John Byrne did this in the when he restarted Superman, showing how Superman shaves. It's like, do I really want to see that? Do I really
I
care?
mean, I don't mind seeing that for a page
You
or two,
know?
but it doesn't have to be the focus. The
No.
fun thing you can do though, like with aging a character, is if you wanted to, for like TikTok Tom, is there's no problem with you saying, you know what, I'm going to show TikTok Tom now. Like, what's he like when he's 50, right? And you can
Yeah,
do like, but as long as you don't build him up to that, is maybe just do like a story that's on its own.
that's it.
Like I like that.
But
I
I
don't
think
mind that. Like Old Man Logan. The idea of Old Man Logan is like, what's Logan? Because like he's technically like can live longer, healing, had this horrible life. What's he going to be like as an old man? It's kind of an interesting story.
It is, I agree, but you don't want to see the progression, because you know what? Do you really want to go for his whole life, and read the story?
Yeah,
No, just show him as a, let's say Logan as like 200-year-old man.
exactly. And so it's like it works that way too. And I mean, I would be interested in seeing like how's Superman going to die? Like if Superman dies of old age, how is he going to die?
Yeah, that's it. Show just the end, just the, let's say 5 days before,
Yeah.
type of
and just, and
approach.
just jump there and be like, this is what'll happen. And obviously, if like, it's not like we're saying. I mean, the problem is you have people who are like, is it canon? Is it part of the story arc? And the problem is then people will be like, well, then we know Superman will never die because we know he's going to die of old age. So you kind of have to like, there's different types of readers out there too. I think who sort of almost ruin that storyline.
That's it. Yes.
So, you know,
But I wonder if readers wise, well, no, actually, you know what? I'm just going to answer the question also with what we talked about before, the Chris Claremont thing,
yeah,
where some readers want that epic storyline, that soap opera, and they want to know every single thing, Kitty Pryde's doing, what she's doing when she's wearing the costume, what she's doing away from the costume, how she's learning, and others like us, after about 20 issues, we're going, enough of
yeah,
this.
yeah.
You know,
Well, the problem is sometimes you never get to the other stuff. Like it's just about their social lives. It's just about, Superman. Like I'm okay seeing Superman shave in the morning, like a couple of panels, and it's like ridiculous, awesome. But if it's like half the comic book, I'm not reading that.
but our friend, our friend Alan Hagen was opposite of us, where he loved that type of stuff.
Yeah,
He wanted to see every detail. He'd want to see, and he loved Claire Claremont. I mean, Claire Claremont is an amazing
yeah,
writer, but for me, it's just like, what, going from one storyline to the other, to get to the end, you have to read so much of that soap opera to get the end result.
yeah,
Where I just want, what, cut it in half.
yeah, yeah. I can use my imagination what happened between one issue and another.
Yeah.
And we can see.
But then again, someone like our friend Alan was one of those guys who would buy the X-Men books every month and would read them, and he got into that whole soap opera.
Yeah, and that's fine, And the nice thing about comic books is there's something for everybody. So if you want that,
That's it.
The funny thing is, like your comic book doesn't really have that because it's so surreal. Like you don't really have like the day-to-day life. Like you do have a bit of the day-to-day life, but it's like you don't have to worry about aging your characters. You don't have to.
No, you don't. No.
You don't have to worry about like a continuing story. Like there are some story arcs that are in there for sure, but there's not sort of this like what's going to happen next, because your stories can kind of go all over the place.
Yes.
And the nice thing about Blue Orchid is it's so new that even if it is a continuing storyline, I've just started, so I haven't
You still have time.
I
Yeah.
haven't.
So I have a question. I have a question about age, and this is where the geek meter is gonna, break. What age do you think is Gru?
I think he's probably in his like late 20s.
I was debating if he's like a teenager.
Maybe like I don't think there's a wrong answer to this.
Okay, because
Like, I think you could argue all of that for sure. The thing is, he's so dumb. He's like an 8-year-old. Like,
but then again, in some stories, they show him where you think he might be in his 40s.
it's true.
Yeah,
There are certain characters that's impossible to put like a
yeah,
a date on them, other than like Superman, which you
yeah.
can't really put a date. Like, he's another. You can't really put a date on him. But yeah, Gru is a tough one. That's
Tough one.
a really tough one. I mean, the other thing too is he's
Okay,
sort of like there's like scantily clad women at times.
Women, that's it. Yeah,
Man, that's a hard one.
hard one.
Yeah.
I think this is a great way to end this episode. Leave it in a mystery. Anyone watching this, leave your thoughts on how old do you think Gru
If anybody
is.
knows Sergio, ask him.